Hi, everyone. My name's Anthony Ruggiano, and in 1988, I was struggling with addiction, and I went into a treatment center. I set up a helpline number, which is 855-963-2113. That's 855-963-2113. That number, phones will be manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you're struggling with addiction, or you know someone that is struggling with addiction, please call that number and let me help. I will be hands-on. I will be personally involved in the person's recovery. They will meet me. They will spend time with me, and I will help them live a life beyond their wildest dreams. So please, if you know anybody that has a problem with addiction, or you yourself have a problem with addiction, please call that number and let me help. And also help their family members or friends. Please call that number, 855-963-2113. That's 855-963-2113. So the mob started in Sicily, the Mafia. It was called the Black Hand. It started up in the mountains in Sicily to protect themselves from the landowners. It started out as them protecting themselves because there was people that owned the land, and they were peasants, and the peasants started an organization, and it originated in Sicily. And then eventually it evolved into a criminal enterprise, and then it started spreading out throughout Italy, to Naples, because my father's from Naples, my mother's from Sicily. And then eventually, after it spread through Sicily, when the immigrants started coming to America, they brought it with them to the East Coast. And from the East Coast, it spread out into the United States. And it was very old school in the beginning when it came over from Sicily. It was all, they used to call them mustache Pete's. It was very old school. They were shaking down their own kind. They had, it was very limited. They brought over their children with them, and some of them had children in America, and they eventually got into the mob life, into the street life, and they were Americanized, and they started doing other things. They wanted to get changed. They wanted to modernize. And then Prohibition came. So then Prohibition started. It was the Volstead Act. The United States government, for some reason, probably a couple of the politicians wanted to make money. I don't think anybody in their right mind would have voted for it. So they voted the Volstead Act in, which was, they made the United States a dry country. And the mob started selling liquor. How they were doing it and who was involved: Lucky Luciano, Al Capone, the old Mustache Pete's. They were all involved. Outside gangs were involved, and they were getting whiskey sent in from Europe. I mean, Kennedy's father, Joe Kennedy, was involved. He was a major importer of Irish whiskey. They were buying molasses out of Canada and making whiskey in the United States. They were buying brewers, where they made beer. They were buying them and making their own beer. And they started opening up speakeasies and nightclubs and selling the liquor and making millions and millions of dollars. And that's when the younger guys, with all the money they were making with Prohibition, figured it was time to get rid of the old Mustache Pete's. And that's when Lucky Luciano and all of them really organized it and created the organized crime that we know today. Once they got rid of the Mustache Pete's and they made the commission, they went after all the gangs. They wanted everything. They wanted everything there. So they went after Dutch Schultz. He had a gang in Harlem. They went after the gangs in the 5 Points, the Irish gangs. All these gangs were kidnapping people for ransom, and they eliminated all that. People were getting murdered. Randomly, they eliminated that. You had to get permission to murder somebody. And what they did was they took over. They killed Dutch Schultz. The African Americans in Harlem invented the number bracket. They went up in Harlem and took over the number racket. They took it. They literally took it from them. They killed whoever they got to kill, and they took whatever. They took it all, and they organized it and they ran it, and it was like one big corporation. So you couldn't really do any criminal activity anymore without the mafia's hand in it. Basically, that's what it came down to. prohibition was going on. They were making tons of money. They branched out into gambling, into prostitution. I mean, they had their hands in everything. The unions started to develop then, and they started taking over the unions, the Teamsters. In New York, they had all the unions that whatever was available, the bricklayers unions, cement unions. And then the Depression hit. During the Depression, from what I understand from my father, is that they were the only ones making money. The mob was the only ones making money because they had supply and demand. People were playing penny numbers to try to win a couple of dollars. People were, buying stolen goods. They were hijacking trucks and, selling stolen stuff out of the trunks of their car. So basically, they were the only ones making money. And in Sicily, Mussolini came into control. Because they still had ties to Sicily and Italy. The wise guys in New York and the United States still had ties in Italy, from what I understand. And then when Mussolini came into power, he started locking them all up in Italy because he wanted everything for himself. He was a gangster himself, I guess you could say. And he started locking everybody up in Italy. And the war broke out. And during the war, they actually, from what I understand, went to the mob and asked for help on the docks because they had all the dock workers and they were trying to cut out the espionage coming into the dock, into the New York piers from Europe. While all this was going on, Vito Genovese went on the lam to Italy. And that's when they say that he started the heroin trade. He started making inroads into heroin in Sicily when he was living in Sicily during the war because he had to get out of the United States because he had a heroin conviction in the United States and he didn't want to go to prison. But eventually he did go to prison. He came back and he went to prison. And while all this was going on, Lucky Luciano unfortunately got convicted for prostitution, which was probably, I don't know, a frame up. And he was, and matter of fact, he was in a prison that I was in Dannemora in Clinton, in Dannemora, New York. He was there and there's a church there, St. Demas. Demas was the criminal that was on the cross next to Christ, that he said, you'll be in my kingdom today. And Lucky Luciano donated $10,000 and built this beautiful church that's inside the walls of Dannemora Clinton prison that I actually went to. And there's a big crucifix of St. Demas in the church of the criminal that was crucified with Christ. And so he donated the money for the church, what he was there doing. He did 10 years up there. And then they made a deal because everybody was corrupt, and they made a deal for him to help on the docks with the espionage, and he agreed, and they deported him. And when the war ended, they deported him back to Italy. Prohibition ended, and the younger guys took over the American Mafia, got rid of all the old timers. Lucky Luciano formed the 5 families, formed the commission. Other states had families too, Cleveland, Boston, Kansas City. I mean, they started branching out. Chicago, of course. They started branching out all over the United States, but he formed a commission with all of them. And in New York, there was, being that it was the biggest city, they had 5 families, and the 5 families were, he was the boss of one family. Joe Bonanno was the boss of another family. Tommy Lucchese was the boss of a family. Pafacci was the boss of the family. And Mangano was the boss of the family, which later became Albert Anastasia's family. And those were the 5 families of New York. Okay. Each family, when they branched out through the United States, like they had a family in Buffalo, they had a family in Philadelphia, they had a family in Boston, in Cleveland, in Kansas City. They had a family in Pennsylvania. They had a family in Tampa, Florida. And each family in each state had their own boss, boss and underboss, but they all had a seat on the commission. But the New York families had all the power, but there was a commission and they did have votes. They did vote. And as far as them committing murders, there was a lot of murders being committed. And what they did was they formed Murders Incorporated. They formed Murders Incorporated in the 40s, and the commission controlled all the murders and sanctioned them out to Murders Incorporated, which was a group of criminals from Brooklyn, Jewish and Italian, that committed all the murders for the commission all over the country. Not only in New York, they traveled. And that was it. They wanted to keep it controlled. They wanted to keep it, they wanted to keep it organized. So outside of New York, in these other cities, there was only one family. Like being New York was so big, there was 5 families in New York. But I know from personal knowledge, Boston had its own family, Rhode Island had its own family, Buffalo had its own family, Cleveland, Kansas City. Pennsylvania had more than one because it's such a big state. And they had a crew in Philly, they had a crew in Pittsburgh. They had a couple of crews in Philly, in Philadelphia. There was a family out in LA. One family, of course, there's only one family in Chicago. Chicago was another big city, but there was only one family there. They used to call it the outfit. That's what Al Capone became the boss of. So basically every city, to my knowledge, had one family that ran the city, but they all had a seat on the commission. There was even families in Canada. There's still a family in Canada, in Montreal. There's a big family, and they all were affiliated. Like the family in Canada is affiliated with the Bananas. The family in Philadelphia used to be affiliated with the Genoveses. Then they switched over to the Gambinos. Every family is affiliated with a family in New York, but they're on their own, but they're affiliated. So they all answer to New York and to the commission. But most of the families throughout the country are affiliated with a New York family. In the 40s, you got guys branching out all over the country, like I said. So there was a family in LA, and Bugsy Siegel, a well-known New York gangster, part of the Jewish mob, was in LA. He took over the Actors Guild, or started the Actors Guild. He was running the Actors Guild. He was shutting down movie sets, so the mob was infiltrating all the unions, and he infiltrated he actually took over the union, the cameraman's union. He actually took over unions where he could shut down motion pictures that were in production. And as he was in LA, he went to Vegas, Nevada, and he noticed that there was gambling there. It was legalized gambling there. And he got the idea to build a casino, and he built the Flamingo, which is still there, which is probably the only original hotel casino that's still in Vegas, the Flamingo Lounge, the Flamingo Resort. And he built that with mob money, and eventually that literally cost him his life. But he was the inventor and founder of Las Vegas, from just driving through the desert and noticing that they had legalized gambling in that state. And the mob ran Vegas for years and years and years, because, when I got married in 1977, Arnel Della Croce, who was the underboss of the Gambino family, and Joe the Cat, who was a soldier, sent me to Vegas for my honeymoon to Caesar's Palace, all expenses paid, credit line at the tables, the crap tables, whatever I wanted to do. And people, when I got there, people that worked in the hotel were like waiting for me and treated me like forget it. They treated me amazing, because the mob was actually, running the show still in Vegas. Now it's all gone. Now